Hello folks, I hope that you are having just the best day in your life today. Today I've got a real pleasure for you. We're going to be taking a look at Bram Stoker's Dracula. When I first created this channel, one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to give you guys a sense of adventure, of purpose, of things that have not been read. Famous writers who have written things that you may not have heard about or read, or taken the time to read, or writers who have unfortunately time has left them wanting more, and so I did a lot of those sorts of things, right? But one of the things I realized is that on a regular basis, people come to your channel not because they're looking up, Earth Abides, but because they're looking up, something by which is a long forgotten hit to a lot of people in the science fiction genre, but because of classics that are out there. And so I've pushed myself to do more and more classics of genres. I've done Dune, I've done Foundation, I've done, Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth. I've done, H.G. Wells. I've done, The Hobbit by Tolkien. I've done a lot of those sorts of things, and today we're going to be taking a look at another one, Bram Stoker's Dracula, which I just reread for the probably fourth or fifth time recently. Now, Bram Stoker's Dracula is a very special book for me. My first favorite book growing up, when I encountered it, was The Lord of the Rings by J.R. Tolkien. When I was in high school, I read Dracula by Bram Stoker, and just absolutely loved it to pieces, and was hugely influenced by this novel. And a lot of things I've done since then have been hugely influenced by Bram Stoker's method of telling the story. I'm going to be giving it a 10 out of 10. It's an absolute classic. And it's one of the most influential, if not the most influential, horror novel of all time. And so anyway, and of course you know what the novel does. You know where it comes from. And then my next favorite novel was Lucifer's Hammer by Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle, which I read when I was in college, and this replaced my favorite. And this was my favorite novel until I went back and reread it a few years later, and I was like, it didn't keep as strongly as I thought that it was going to, and I had noticed more tropes going back and reading it that I didn't notice my first time going through fresh-eyed. But I still like it. It's still a fun novel, and I still reviewed it for you. And then other novels stepped in, like Earth Abides that I mentioned earlier, Hero's Journey. And today, if you were to ask me what my favorite novel is today, I wouldn't have an answer. In fact, I've given you that answer before in one of my subs questions, where I was asked questions about my favorite things from some of you guys that I do every 100 subs episodes. I do a special one where I look at something that I haven't talked about before, and I typically will, and what I've done a lot of times is I've answered questions. One of the questions I get asked was pretty regularly is, what's my favorite X? And in one case I was asked what my favorite novel is. I was like, I don't have one anymore. I used to, but I don't anymore. Any one of those 5 books, Lord of the Rings, Dracula, Lucifer's Hammer, Earth Abides, and Hero's Journey, could be on any given day or based on my mood, and any one of those novels could be one of my favorites that are out there, and I like them a lot. Hero's Journey is by Sterling Lanier, and it's on Gygax's Appendix N. So it's one of my favorite novels I've ever read, and probably my biggest revelation. Just absolutely love it. Going into it blind. I reviewed that one for you. Earth Abides by George R. Stewart is another one of my favorite novels that I just absolutely have loved for you. I just gave a copy to my dad because I love it so much, and he likes speculative fiction, particularly science fiction and fantasy. So I gave him a copy of that. Absolutely loved it. So I've loved a lot of things, but Bram Stoker's Dracula has really influenced me in a lot of major ways, and I mentioned it earlier. So let's talk a little bit about how has this novel influenced me. Well, it's written in a documentary style, I think. The things that are happening are lurid, they're crazy, they're interesting, and so forth. So what Bram Stoker does to ground it is that everything is an actual proper document. There are a few newspaper articles, there are telegrams, there are letters, there are journey entries, including journey entries in a phonograph by Dr. Seward. And I just absolutely love this idea of making it all different types of documents in order to prove this case, in order to ground the, the undead and what's happening therein. I really enjoy it. And I enjoy that style of writing and the limited perspective that it provides a whole lot. It also makes reading a chapter easier, as very few chapters are actually just, like with the first 4 chapters as key exceptions to the book, as just one document. And the first 4 chapters are just all Jonathan Harker's journal. But typically thereafter, there are going to be letters, there are going to be multiple journal entries across a chapter. There's going to be a couple of memorandums by Abraham Van Helsing and meeting Harker a few times. And so there's a lot of fun things that are happening. And I enjoy it a lot. And I have, in my own writing, both fiction and nonfiction, has also done documentary things. For example, I once wrote a dynasty for Madden for a forum called Front Office Football Central, where I played games of Madden on my my gaming system, and then I gave you what actually happened in a forum where I posted about the various things that happened, and every single one of those posts was a document. It was a press release, it was a press conference, it was a forum post. It was something like that, right? I documented phone calls, I documented press conferences, press releases. I documented newspaper articles and online articles from various sources as my method of telling it, and that was heavily influenced by Dracula. So Dracula has influenced a lot of the things that I've done in my life, and that's just one example of how. A Madden dynasty, where I go over how my Madden thing. In fact, what I did was I actually took over the Cardinals, cut everybody who was on the Cardinals, signed a bunch of free agents in order to start things anew, and I moved my team to Las Vegas. So there were a lot of articles telling you what was happening, conversations, hearing the overarching story, press releases, newspaper articles, draft overviews by organizations, that sort of thing. So I did a lot of documentary work on that, and that's just one example of how I did it, and how Bram Stoker has influenced me as a writer with his documentary style. It was the first time that I read a horror short story or novel that had a documentary style of writing. Now, a lot of follow-up things that have been written subsequent to Dracula have journals or letters, ways of telling stories. Like H.P. Lovecraft, for example, does it a lot in order to ground his stuff. I'm sure that people did it before Stoker, but I would not be surprised to learn that Stoker popularized that, considering how popularized this thing is. And again, Dracula is an absolute essential horror work. And it's arguably, if it's not one of the most, it's certainly, if it's arguable that that's the most influential horror work of all time, we're still reading it, we're still watching movies that are based in the vampires. He modernized vampires, and how he creates vampires that have been canonized. We have vampires appearing in fantasy, we have vampires appearing in science fiction, we have vampires appearing in horror, and they typically have the canonization that we have there. So there's a lot of various vampires that Bram Stoker gave to us. And so it was highly read. Now, as I mentioned before, we open up with our journal from Jonathan Harker, who's one of our major point of view characters. He is a young solicitor who has just passed his soliciting test, and this is his first assignment. He's doing this for a friend and a mentor who is sick with surgery, and so his mentor has provided him a letter that he's going to be bringing to Count Dracula, and he's on his way to Transylvania. And this is his first sort of job as a solicitor. So he's young and innocent in the ways of the world as a solicitor. And one of the things I actually think is that, is this what soliciting is normally like? As if you're a little weird. But one of the things that solicitors do during this time is that they sell property, and they make sure that all the property deeds are signed, leases are signed, documents that are purchasing them are signed. So he's bringing these documents over to Transylvania because the Count has purchased properties in London. So we're going to be following along with that for the early parts. Even the first chapter, which is fairly mild, has some horror style writing to it. Bram Stoker definitely knows what genre he's in, and there are some horror style things that will happen, from the fears of the locals that Jonathan Harker will, to his detriment, dismiss as just merely local crazies that are overly, religious and so forth. And he will do some fun things that will play into later on what happens during the later chapters during his journey there. And then after the first 4 chapters, we'll then move to other characters. Lucy, Mina, both write letters to each other. Mina has a journal. That'll be one of our things. Dr. Seward has a journal by phonograph. He's also another major character. We'll also have Arthur and Quincy, who are not journal writers. So you might get the occasional letter or telegram from them, which include, or to them, which includes them in the story. But overall, they aren't point of view characters. They're just characters that are primary characters. And then Dr. Van Helsing is also another major character. And he, again, isn't a character that typically will write journals or letters or anything like that. They'll have the occasional one in there, including a memorandum near the end of the novel to get things started and so forth. There's not anything I can't say about Dracula that hasn't been said before. It's clearly one of the classics of the genre. So I'll go ahead and leave you to it. Have you read Dracula? Or probably, what did you think of it? Did you agree with my 10 out of 10 rating? Or my thoughts? Has it influenced you like it's influenced me? Do you see it as one of the great classic works in horror like I do? And one of the most influential, if not the most influential? If not, I would be more than happy to engage you with it further in the comments below, whatever your take is. Or if you want to talk about spoilers, which I did not review because I was very spoiler light. I only did the first couple of chapters in my summary for you. I would be more than happy to engage with those further in the comments below as well. If you like this video, why not hit that subscribe button? Because this would be a lot more decent following horror, fantasy, and science fiction. And then finally, hey, I want to thank you for taking some time out of your day and investing it and watching my video. We all have a lot of things happening in our lives, right? And we're being pulled in so many different directions. So the fact that you spent this time with me is incredibly humbling, and I appreciate it. So thanks again, and have a great day.